Despite its abhorrent launch 5 years ago, I recently did a video highlighting how, though being far from the masterpiece it had enough potential to be, Cyberpunk 2077 had in fact won me over rather spectacularly. It's a great game, it has excellent characters, an interesting narrative, it's an RPG packed to the brim with quests highlighting the antisocial status quo of this retro-futuristic dystopia. When the game is trying to make an impact or even just a point, it does so chillingly and harrowingly. And of course we get to hallucinate Keanu Reeves often. I have no idea where my special schizophrenia friend gets all these cigarettes, but where else do you get that benefit? And now that the game actually works, all that and more is there to be appreciated in all its glory. However, I can think of many arguments for why Cyberpunk 2077 just falls short of being the masterpiece it wants to be, and many want to believe it is, but no argument is quite as strong as the one the game's DLC Phantom Liberty makes by actually being one. Phantom Liberty, comparatively, is a slice. It's a considerably smaller scale undertaking released a few short years after the base game, featuring the likeness of yet another A-lister. Fortunately, this one is not in our head. There's only so much Hollywood my brain can take. But it isn't just about throwing Idris Elba in there and hoping for the best. It takes everything Cyberpunk 2077 did well and makes it better in a spy thriller-esque story that feels oddly fitting in a world full of horrifying technological advancements. I said I'd eventually pluck up the motivation to do a video on Phantom Liberty exclusively, since I largely excluded it in my piece on the base game because, to be honest, more than anything, Phantom Liberty highlights where Cyberpunk's overall production value could have been improved by showing us that in practice. That isn't a knock to CD Projekt, or the excellence of the experience they plucked from the grave of a game a lesser studio would have disconnected live support from long before it reached the fabulous state it's in now. It's a compliment. This is the natural order of things. This is how you demonstrate awareness towards the positives and shortcomings of your own product, by striving to improve upon it, by making the product you hoped the last one was, having that be integrated within the last product is icing on the cake. Phantom Liberty is a top quality expansion from a company who, unsurprisingly, has seen joy particularly with expansions in the past. So Phantom Liberty's 2023 arrival was no surprise really. Few can deny Phantom Liberty was a do-over, a second chance for a chunk of Cyberpunk to deliver a positive, lasting first impression. And in the realm of leaving an indent on your mind, Phantom Liberty excels in its memorable characters, its top-tier writing, impeccable world-building, tighter set pieces, better quest structure, more meaningful jobs, this giant robot thing that gives me nightmares, the prominence of a fixer named Mr. Hands. Somebody at CD Projekt knew exactly what they were doing with that one. It is an utterly mesmerising piece of art packed with all the twists and turns you'd expect from a spy thriller. If you want peak, it's right here, disguised as a Frenchman. Nevertheless, it has its own flaws, and I wish to explore those, as we also explore what it is about this expansion that elevates the entire experience this game is looking to provide. How did it accomplish being the summit of Cyberpunk's years-long redemption story? And how does it rejuvenate the RPG experience off the back of dozens, if not hundreds of hours in the base game? I think thousands is wishful thinking, but I'm sure you exist. In short, what makes Phantom Liberty so bloody special? So grab yourself some bubbly, feeling fancy this time around. Sit back and enjoy as we endeavour to get to the bottom of it. This is what makes Phantom Liberty so damn good. I think a sensible place to start will be to talk about the DLC's world space, Dogtown, and the simple advantage it gets from being a DLC region. As far as open worlds go, Night City is a phenomenal accomplishment. It more than competently captures every emotion the game wants you to feel. It is a quintessential cyberpunk setting. It's a city dominated by this high technology, yet the quality of life is in the gutter. It's a city ruled by corporations, and the average individual is more or less left to fend for themselves. It bears the visage of a city of opportunity, disguising corruption and inhumanity under a mile of neon. Yet the repulsive environment still has an allure, particularly for a mercenary like V. It's a place where you can cast away who you were, become a legend. It's an intricate, layered labyrinth, packed to the brim with stories of dystopian social decay, corporate greed, the loss of autonomy. It is, by design, a depressing place to be. And that creates a compelling world liberated from any binary definitions of morality. It's a world of dilemmas. No decision is straightforward. Every character has baggage, and that allows the setting to transcend from just a backdrop to a complex network of societal woes that every character we can possibly meet is grappling with. In that respect, it's an amazing world for the themes, the storytelling, and much of the side content wishes to encompass. I could talk about it at length for about half an hour and still fail to do it justice, but I think it's fair to say this world bore an impossible weight. It was the open world of one of the most anticipated video games that there's ever been. If there are cracks in it, people are going to take note. Moreover, Night City needed to support an entire open world game. That means it needed to be dense, intricate, but also expansive and diverse. It needed to encompass not just the theming of the main story, but all the side content. It needed to cast a very wide net. And for what it's worth, I think CD Projekt did a better than outstanding job. But these are problems a DLC world space simply does not have. There's no crippling weight of expectation born from a game that was announced 8 years before it launched to be this fun, massive, open world full of possibilities, secrets, and various layers of life. It can just serve as a backdrop for the story being told. The world is already created. This is just an extension of it to house the narrative of the DLC. Anything else it offers emerges with confidence because the limit is closer. It's understood we won't average as many hours in Dogtown as we do in the rest of Night City, and that allows it to laser focus on what it's trying to be. In Dogtown's case, that is to show us that while Night City is a hellhole in disguise, Dogtown's just a hellhole. It's a walled-off sub-district of Pacifica, free from corporations, albeit ruled by an autocrat named Kurt Hansen, and in absence of the carefully disguised corporate corruption that dominates Night City, Dogtown is dominated by more obvious decay. For most of its inhabitants, life is a series of slums, overshadowed by crumbling skyscrapers. The local infrastructure is well and truly broken. This isn't an accidental testament to corporations holding up society with an example of corporations not being present somewhere and that somewhere being a dumpster. It actually tells us two things. It tells us Night City is grappling with a problem too complex to simply do away with the evil mega corporations that run it, in keeping with the ethos of no happy endings nor ideal solutions that more or less permeates throughout the game. It's also a furthering of the commentary that Night City represents, and that is the rather cynical view that society exists at the whim of the mega rich. In this case, these big corporations, Arasaka, Militech, I can't remember the rest. Night City's society exists to disguise the disparity. On the one end, you have big profits for the few. On the other, for the masses, abject poverty, a low living standard, urban mayhem caused by the distinct lack of reasonable prospects for ordinary people. If that sounds anything like the world we actually occupy in our actual lives, I fail to be convinced that that is a coincidence. Dogtown, for the most part, gravitates towards one extreme, and that is the increasingly desperate reality of ordinary people. What happens to the not-so-lucky many when they're severed from the illusion cast by the lucky few? Simply put, Dogtown is the answer. Without living this lie that you're contributing towards something, your reality plunges deeper into miserable stagnation. Your environment becomes a deteriorating cesspit because nobody equipped to make it appear any different has a reason to. Sure, Kurt Hansen rules it with an iron fist, he keeps the corporations at bay, but he sits in unchallenged absolute rule, propped up by a paramilitary force. Unchallenged. There's no government structure to speak of to make the lives of people better. He and his wealthy inner circle live in luxury up at the Black Sapphire. From here, the ordinary folk of Dogtown must look so small. Naturally, Hansen's interests lie elsewhere. Dogtown persists to exist under a rudimentary, lawless regime, a manifestation of rock bottom, abandoned both governmentally and economically. Sure, Barghest soldiers can be seen at checkpoints and regularly patrolling, but what are they there to accomplish? To keep the peace? Or to uphold the status quo? The residents may be free from being subject to the tyranny and corruption of corporations, but an opportunist fills the void they leave, and that is the result of the moral void left behind, in a world dominated by greed and agendas. Dogtown then is a warning that such damage is largely irreversible. This district now being removed from that system simply pulls the curtain back on that damage. Night City is only ever becoming economically redundant away from being Dogtown. So what's that further trying to say about our world, from which we can draw many parallels? I leave the burden of inference on your shoulders. Safe to say, Dogtown is a very compelling environment, because you can understand why this insular portion of Night City looks like a hot zone in a war-torn country. It certainly looks a lot more like one by the time we're done with it. The truth is, it is war-torn, or at least it was. Except the debris of that war was never cleared away, and it was never rebuilt. Human habitation is no longer a reason to rebuild it. And yet despite its decay, or should we say emergence from the ashes of conflict, without a plan, just like the rest of Night City, there's something oddly beautiful about Dogtown. It's so unbelievably detailed, my old PC struggled to handle it. So I had to get a new PC, not necessarily just to do this video, but this video is a bonus of it. Please don't ask me how much that set me back. I'll cry. Violently. And then there are all the ways the game expertly demonstrates the struggle of life here. I'm not sure the arrival of V has helped make the odds of survival in Dogtown particularly optimistic, but for the people of Dogtown, despite living somewhere where a carpet bombing would only make improvements, there's a charming sense of community. Night City as a whole is quite antisocial. It has pockets here and there. But like any urban centre, its population is dense. The novelty of being around so many individuals is worn off for most within it. Add on top the fast-paced element. Everybody's always chasing the carrot. Or the illusion of the carrot. Dogtown doesn't have that prospect. It doesn't need to be fast-paced. As for the inhabitants, such a corp-free, tax-free zone, where even Night City law enforcement dare not tread, attracts very specific kinds of people. Those on the run, criminals, gangs, those looking to profit on the black market, and ordinary people desperate enough to abandon Night City society, settling for survival here, among the dregs. It's a sad reality, but it makes existence here a shared cause. That is a distinction from the rest of Night City, where people come from all walks of life, have a diverse array of aspirations, and chiefly look out for number one. Dogtown is a common ground for those left behind. When you interact with its inhabitants and engage with their troubles, you know exactly where they're coming from, and what taking your time to aid them contributes towards. And that's a nice foil to a story the prominent characters of which are evasive and enigmatic, serving agendas, feeding us half details. It's an inspired choice to contrast such a muddy plot with a backdrop that's so blatantly itself, even if that something is quite oppressive and miserable. It gives you a motivating factor to get stuck in. You can't save these people, you can't cure all of Dogtown's woes and turn it into a paradise, that's impossible. But you can come to understand it. You can see for yourself how it differs from Night City in virtually every way. You can see the positives and negatives of this very different society. And when a DLC takes you and places you in a new environment, that's precisely what you want. To feel as if you are somewhere else. And that's what Dogtown is. Even if it's technically sort of within Night City, it feels like somewhere else. That grants exploring it value, even if you've been exploring extensively for the rest of the game. It's unique, and while there's a lot of overlap in environmental theming, it's contributing to a different story. So, in order to feel like you've actually seen it, one must get off thy backside and go and explore. However, all of that means nothing if we don't have a viable anchor, a reason why V would take the time to go to this rundown slum. And that justification typically comes in the form of the main story. In Phantom Liberty's case, it's got a whopper. In Cyberpunk's case, the story needs to begin with a very compelling hook. It's hard to forget that V is grappling with a very serious case of dying. After all, one of the side effects of this dying is a persistence of hallucinations of Johnny Silverhand. We have got the John Wick crossover event with a Bionicle, imprinted on a relic that's trapped in V's head, very rapidly overwriting our consciousness. Somehow smoking cigarettes. Where does he get them? I don't understand. While pontificating anarchy at every opportunity. And while there are far worse hallucinations to be having than Keanu Reeves, even if only a domestic terrorist variant of the guy, we're constantly reminded this symbiosis is unhealthy, even if it did help lead us to this delicious Porsche 911. The game reminds us that V has a rare strain of dying through slapping us with a constance of seizures caused by the malfunctioning relic. If I'm being honest, it gets old after the first 10 times, but it's there to serve as a reminder that we're on a clock, that V's condition is rapidly worsening. Therefore, the plot is a race against time to the ending, otherwise V might cease to be. Probably not the most ideal plot to marry to an open-world RPG, because while V here is on death's door, we somehow find the time to undertake dozens of vapid jobs, hunt cyberpsychos for a laugh, engage in illegal street racing. We hunt a serial killer, we acquire a sick new car, we literally crucify a man, and we investigate a political landscape-shattering conspiracy. Guys, help, this fast-acting disease is starting to feel a tad lethargic. The point I'm trying to make is Cyberpunk as it was already offered far too many distractions, arguably, from the pressing matter the narrative is built around. So, what kind of hook could Phantom Liberty possibly offer us? The answer, of course, is the promise of a solution. So we're summoned to the Dogtown border by a mysterious caller named So-Mi, who goes by Songbird. She knows all about us, she knows we've got the lunatic rocker boy stuck in our head, and claims she can save us. Sound too good to be true? Well, she can see Johnny, she even mutes him like a Discord mod, and this makes her promise of a cure seem more real. And it's here where it becomes known to us what we'll have to do in order to acquire it. We have to save the president. You see, So-Mi isn't really here, she's actually aboard Space Force One. Imagine Air Force One, but it can go to space and isn't overloaded with tangerines. Well, it's flying over Night City, transporting the president of the new United States of America. It appears to have been hacked, and it's due to come down in Dogtown. So we've got to sneak our way in, intercept the plane as it crash lands, and rescue the president before Kurt Hansen and his grubby militia gets to her. I'm not sure Johnny, not a big fan of the government Silverhand, will be awfully pleased by this new mission, so it's very easy to understand why Songbird muted him. Skipping ahead, since I don't want this to become a narrative recap, we do manage to get into Dogtown just in time to watch the president fall out of the sky, watch it crash land and make improvements across town, nick somebody's van and make our way across town to reach her, evading or physically harming Barghest soldiers along the way. There is something to be said in the set pieces along the journey, but for the time being I'm going to save that. It doesn't take us too long to arrive at the plane where Myers is the only survivor, because, of course, and naturally the president has just crash landed in a lawless land. The locals want her dead. So we and Myers have to blast our way to safety with the aid of Songbird, who leads us to an abandoned museum where we square off with more Barghest troops, and just as the odds start to look overwhelming, Songbird hijacks a massive robot and starts blasting. Then she loses control of the bloody thing and the thing tries to blast us, losing contact with So-Mi in the process, beginning a robot chase that I'm glad we got out the way early. I've got to be honest, these set pieces awaken a panic within me that I can't explain. Anyway, after dropping a building on it, we fight and destroy the cursed machine, but Songbird doesn't come back. And that is our mission for the rest of the DLC. We've got to A, figure out what the hell happened, and B, figure out what happened to Songbird. After all, it was she who promised us the cure. This is what pushes us to enlist the aid of Idris Elba's character Solomon Reed, an NUSA sleeper agent who happens to operate within Dogtown. We're now an agent in a world of espionage, but we'll leave escorting the president to safety to more experienced hands, for this is where Phantom Liberty's greatest strength has well and truly entered the equation. That, of course, is its characters. Cyberpunk 2077 is full of great characters. There are simply far too many to list. The game is massive and full of them. They're all interesting, and in failing being interesting, they're fun to be around. But there are so many characters because the game is trying to encompass an entire city that engagement with them as individuals is not particularly concentrated. So for the most part, you get bits with them here and there over the course of a quest or two, and in fairness, for most characters, that's enough. But however high quality the characters of Cyberpunk are, Phantom Liberty doesn't need to persist with the saturation. After all, that's already been done. Phantom Liberty's a short extension, so as far as its plot's concerned, it only introduces so many characters, and rather than having us jump from character to character, it fleshes out those before us. And in the realm of character writing, Phantom Liberty absolutely thrives. Every character is richly detailed and feels important. That even goes for the likes of Myers, who, upon meeting Reed, is quickly smuggled out of Dogtown, only to be seen again at the end of the expansion. And even then with a character shift that feels appropriate considering everything we've learned about her along the way. But the primary two characters we're going to get the most familiar with, outside of Silverhand's opinions and V of course, are Reed and So Me, representing different ends of the same dilemma, neither of which lacking complexity. It's through them that we learn there are no real black and white characters, and this is done through the game maneuvering us to make a decision between the two characters, with neither choice being inherently ideal or necessarily bad. You could in theory gauge it by whether or not you like being chased around abandoned facilities by big scary robots, but by any metric that V could logically know about and gauge, Phantom Liberty is committed to making the decision-making process as messy as possible. The metric isn't black and white morality or even morality at all. It's trust. Not a question of which one of these characters do you trust, both are equally untrustworthy. But which do you trust more? Reed's a dutiful soldier. He fights for a cause that has burnt him in the past. As a sleeper agent, he boasts a wealth of experience and can more or less play any tune someone needs to hear to get the job done. But in his lifetime of living for a cause greater than himself, this ability to lie and convince has become internal too. Solomon Reed is a character in constant conflict with himself. He knows he's devoted to a system that, thus far, has, at every opportunity, crossed him. He knows that Songbird herself has betrayed him. He's full of regret, and you get the sense he's a deeply introspective character. Yet, despite all this betrayal and a lifetime of dedication to a cause, the injustices of which he has personally been at the pointy end of, he still fights for it and justifies it like it's all he knows how to do. His sense of self has been worn down over decades of both external and internal brainwashing. That the Solomon Reed we see before us is ultimately a mouthpiece. He has memories and emotions that contradict his dedication to the NUSA, justifying himself and by extension the institution he represents on the ideals he was missold on. And nobody sees through this agonizing quite as cleanly as Johnny Silverhand, who recognizes that Reed is a very similar individual to himself, or at least that's what he claims. He sees in Reed a man strung similarly whom he could have become. But believe me when I say Johnny does not mean that in any way that could be misconstrued as envy. Like Reed, Johnny once served, except when faced with the brunt of corruption, he deserted. Reed has seen the truth, but he insulates his ideals to cling to a life he knows nothing but. This means his ponderings run the risk of becoming somewhat inconsistent. His reflections stop just short of realization. Thus he remains a lapdog to the NUSA, a lapdog to Myers, who's portrayed early on as a highly personable character. She may be the president, but at the beginning of the story it's just her, us, God knows how many Barghest troops, and a big murder robot. There's no real sign of the sleazy politician. No suggestion that we might lament digging a tracker out of her neck as a missed opportunity. But as the DLC goes on, we learn a very different side to her. She goes from being almost likable to a vile, ruthless, self-serving politician willing to do whatever it takes to get what she wants. And what she wants is So-Mi, alive, offering us the same thing So-Mi did, a solution to our relic problem. Post the intro, she may be physically absent for most of the expansion, but Solomon Reed serves as her stand-in. His loyalty to the NUSA as an idea allows him to be manipulated by whomever's in charge. And for now, that whom is Myers, making Reed her executor. Solomon Reed has every opportunity to walk away, but he chooses to stay. So how can you trust a disillusioned man in denial playing the game because it's all he knows how to do? However likable and cool the guy is, you can't. Rather than live by his principles, he hammers them to fit whatever narrative he needs to justify working for the NUSA, working for Myers, telling himself he's a patriot to put his mind at ease. He is a tool to be abused by the corrupt and power-hungry, and that reflects in his methods getting the job done. While his superiors are fueled by their avarice, Reed is fueled by his duty. It surpasses and overwhelms anything else he might feel. In the end of the day, to him, his orders are most important, and the NUSA's betrayed him in the past. Who's to say they won't betray us through him? Just like they betrayed him through So-Mi, which was a pretty big part of the marketing if you recall. So you've got a man who's willing to get shafted in the bastardized name of the greater good, and if he's so forgiving of that, what do you reckon his attitude towards betraying us is going to be? He might feel bad about it, but he will do it. His duty controls his actions at the expense of those around him, and we can see the fallout of that at the beginning of the expansion. Take Alex. She and Reed came here at the beginning of the Unification War, and since that op went bad, she's been stuck here in Dogtown despite desperately wanting to leave. She was left to believe that Reed betrayed her and the NUSA because he had orders. He left Alex to be fed the cover story. He could have broken that, but he left that bond to wither as a sacrifice on the altar of his patriotism. And it's not that the man doesn't care for Alex, or indeed Songbird. It's that he takes the philosophy of not allowing his personal feelings to interfere with the job at hand to the extreme. He just cares more for the vow he made as an impressionable younger man before he understood its true meaning. And we can take that same oath when Myers basically hires us, much to Johnny's dismay if we choose to. He argues it's a pledge made by nobody with the capacity to truly understand it. As such, if we reject the oath, he commends our wisdom. As for Reed, he lives by this meaningless oath because he hopes it can give his actions since, however reprehensible, when observed in a vacuum, some meaning. That is the paradox he chooses not to see his way out of, despite at least on some level being thoroughly equipped with the knowledge to understand that he is grappling with such a paradox. To simplify it, Reed is untrustworthy because there's no individual there. His loyalty influences his actions to such an extent that he simply carries out the will of the NUSA, an entity we know to be fundamentally corrupt. As for Songbird, she's meant to be the more relatable of the characters. She's the reason we're here in the first place, and her seeing Johnny and swiftly muting him makes her seem like a genuine promise of aid, while V grapples with an increasingly hopeless situation. To make her relatable, she, much like V, is dying, albeit not from the same thing exactly. Under Myers, So-Mi has been abused as a netrunner. Her constant encounters with the Black Wall are causing her to fade both physically and mentally. This explains the whole big robot going berserk on us calamity, as a rogue AI from beyond the Black Wall took over. Under the NUSA, and by extension Myers, she sees no chance of a reprieve. She's a weapon to Myers, a highly valuable asset for many years. The NUSA plan to use her long after her body has been utterly ravaged by the Black Wall, which to her is a fate worse than death. So she orchestrated this entire mess. She's the one who made contact with Hansen and had Space Force 1 blasted out of the sky. She's looking for a way out, to escape. Therefore, she's using V to get what she wants. She doesn't come clean with us early. She only feeds us the information we need to go off to unwittingly exercise elements to her overall plan, and even if it is just a plan to escape being misused at the hands of Myers, she has killed to make it this far, and she doesn't earnestly intend to bring about a cure to our relic situation. She's simply playing into the idea of a shared struggle, playing into that relatability to manipulate us. Like Reed, she too is a slave to the NUSA, but the crucial difference is she's more open about Myers' dubious morality. Not that Reed isn't especially, but the corruption of the NUSA influences Songbird more in the sense that she wishes to break away from it and is actively implementing steps to accomplish that. We also get a lot more of So-Mi one-to-one due to the fact that she can communicate with us via the relic. She can filter out Johnny as she does it, which is our first clue that she doesn't want his insights swaying the conversations. What this uninterrupted one-to-one dynamic allows is for So-Mi to come across as sincere even when she isn't. She can give us at-length perspective on other characters, chiefly Myers and Reed, and make them seem less trustworthy, while she appears more so because only V can hear her. This is apparent in the museum. When passing exhibits, Songbird can give commentary on them that completely counters any commentary Myers is making because Myers cannot hear her. It portrays an element of contempt for Myers that warns us early she isn't to be trusted, while making So-Mi seem more trustworthy herself. When you factor Reed as a stand-in for Myers via the proxy of his unyielding loyalty to the FIA and NUSA, it makes Reed seem less trustworthy too. Yet it's So-Mi's imperfections that make her the most relatable. She hasn't done anything in pursuit of a cure that V wouldn't in theory. She's an individual seeking to break free from the NUSA and survive, much like V is an individual looking to survive being overwritten by Johnny Silverhand's personality. She may not be some all-round good person. After all, morality doesn't really factor in much of Cyberpunk in such a simple way. But when you consider this overarching similarity of struggling to survive and retain that same aspect of individuality, there's really very little So-Mi does that V cannot come to understand. In our pursuit for survival, we're often thrust into situations where we have to make decisions with no clear righteous answer. Now we're somewhat on the receiving end of the decisions of another facing that same existential threat, with that same continuous problem. There are no right choices, which also means there are no wrong choices. Nonetheless, So-Mi is self-serving. She's out for her own survival. If she has to choose between that and us, she'll choose that. She's a mirror of V, whose own mission to become a legend has become engulfed in a fight across Night City to survive. But with So-Mi, there's a darker layer. She's desperate, and she's very dangerous. We see her compromised as our ally in the opening. We end up in a nightmarish confrontation with a big robot. Her autonomy isn't just under threat from the NUSA. She's already demonstrated she's a potential vessel for more sinister forces to control. Considering how dangerous she is, maybe under the NUSA and Militech is the safest place for her. Not necessarily for So-Mi, but for everyone else. Both these two central characters are likeable. They're also dislikable. They're pitiable. They're deep. They're interesting, and above all else, neither is particularly trustworthy, and that creates a really strong narrative that doesn't need much in the way of villain input. As such, Kurt Hansen is a very muted antagonist, if you can even call him that. He's just a guy who happens to absolutely rule his little hellhole kingdom in the shadow of the neon-drenched skyline of Night City. He's got his own ambitions, his own concerns. Sure, he's playing along with Songbird's scheme, but it's convenient for him. He's no grand architect of anything we're reacting to, though at first it might seem like it. This ultra-skilled netrunner has simply landed on his porch, and like any valuable resource, he seeks to guard that. Reed and the NUSA sniffing around is no doubt going to result in resistance, but the point I'm making is Hansen for the most part is just there. He may be intimidating, calculating, cool, far from a good man in his own right, an opportunist gangster who rose from the ashes of a militia, but that's where his intricacy ends, because the illusion of him being an antagonist serves its purpose swiftly and precisely. He is a smokescreen. His role in Dogtown is just a circumstance, after all. He injects an added layer that introduces uncertainty through false certainty as to why Space Force 1 fell out of the sky, kickstarting this whole thing. The true struggle of the narrative is the choice between siding with Reed, saving Songbird by bringing her back to the NUSA, or siding with So-Mi and freeing her from the metaphorical shackles of Myers' endless power games. It's not a story of good and evil, nor is it a story of heroes and villains. It's a story of characters, and Reed and So-Mi are excellently written, deep, thought-provoking, fascinating individuals, and while they are the standout too, they're far from the only ones to make an impression. Hansen's shift from a villain to obstacle is also interesting in its own way. His character is observed more environmentally than directly, though face-to-face encounters do happen and you get the sense he's a sure man with plans upon plans. We consume a lot of Hansen through making observations about Dogtown. A rundown, glorified slum that looks like it has been built on the edge of a war zone dominated by derelict skyscrapers and crumbling infrastructure. The people live tax-free, but Barguest makes its presence known to uphold the status quo, and the standard of living isn't measured because nobody cares. Hansen simply uses Dogtown as a platform for his own schemes. He's interesting because he seems like a highly effective and ruthless leader of this crumbling place, and he sure enough is exactly that, surrounding himself with the wealthy at the Black Sapphire, making business deals away from prying eyes that the residents of Dogtown are sure to never benefit from. But when you cut to the core of what this expansion is actually about, you realise how little that actually matters. That's not a criticism to its inclusion. Yes, were Hansen actually the main antagonist, which I suppose he technically is in absence of a hard-defined main antagonist that takes priority over him, but only technically, he would be underutilised. But when you evaluate his position as being well informed about the back and forth between So-Mi and the NUSA, he becomes an auxiliary threat, a source from which stakes can come before the stakes come. Were we shackled to Reed's perspective, maybe he would be the antagonist, but no. We're playing the role of an outsider, V, seeking a solution to a problem that Hansen has nothing to do with. It's the story of Reed and So-Mi, their past, how the NUSA has moulded them into weapons to be used at the will of whomever is in charge of a corporate-backed government. Reed cannot fathom unshackling himself from Maya's control, and Songbird wants nothing more than to be free. While we take the time to properly pace and piece that together, Hansen serves appropriately as an obstacle protruding from the backdrop to dance around. And by contrast to both Reed and Songbird, he's oddly honest. Honest as a value is a very strong word. What I mean is he has no reason to be dishonest with us. Reed is manipulating us because he's manipulating himself. Therefore, any interaction with us cannot be sincere. So-Mi is manipulating us to get what she wants, which is to survive. Knowing full well her method of survival is only good for one person, therefore, she has nothing to offer us, and substitutes that lack of a bargaining chip with a fib. Hansen's a man who's established his own lawless domain, where neither Night City nor the NUSA can interfere easily, specifically to keep his shady dealings direct. I'm not saying he wouldn't stab us in the back if he viewed us as an equal, but the fact is he doesn't, and he's frank about that. More than anything though, he's grappled with the same things that Reed and So-Mi presently are. He's a former soldier who fought for his country, and now he's turned and is fighting for himself. He's even created his own microstate to be free of it all, and yet here we are, representing the NUSA, biting at his ankles. And I suppose that gives him some weight as an example of the illusion of freedom. This can also be seen through Reed and So-Mi. Reed believes his freedom comes from a principled adherence to the code that keeps him loyal to the service of an idea that exists only so far as is convenient to the powers that be, and through his subservience to a cause that deviates wildly from the idea of itself sold to him, he ironically becomes enslaved by the very thing he pursues. As for So-Mi, she believes freedom as being as far away from Myers and the NUSA as possible, being in charge of her own future again, unshackled from the mistakes of a 19-year-old, fueled on boisterous rebellion and net-running capabilities. So-Mi seeks a freedom she cannot obtain by herself, relying on V, who has to willingly aid her, knowing there's nothing in it for us, and that's a mental hurdle she takes the entire DLC to overcome, and even with that box ticked, Myers demonstrates she'll never stop hunting her. What options are you truly left with when a global power wants you? Space! So that gives you a general outline of the dilemma V faces in Phantom Liberty. This isn't our story, this is a story we just happen to be an outsider's perspective on, whose decisions ultimately count. The characters are messy and multi-dimensional, and that's fantastic. The DLC doesn't invalidate any of the other decisions it provides us with. Every choice V can make regarding Reed and So-Mi, choosing who to side with, can be justified from the perspective of V. What would V do? All of these things, if you do them. And that's what makes Phantom Liberty's characters so well done. Neither Songbird nor Reed are so reprehensible that siding with the other makes more sense, nor are either of them so redeemable that siding with them is the absolute correct choice. There is no wrong choice, no ideal solution, and regardless of who we ultimately side with and what we ultimately choose, come the end we find ourselves second-guessing our decisions, wondering if that was truly the correct choice. The DLC is masterful at concluding on an empty note that gives you this sense of reflecting numbness, regardless of what we do. And I think that's the only emotion that can satisfyingly encapsulate the character-driven ride we've been on. It's exhausting, wading through the half-truths and lies, yet it's so compelling that you soldier on to the end, even reloading saves to do other endings. Phantom Liberty gives you something to digest, to sleep on. There's a lot to consider. Chiefly, did you overall succeed, or did you fail? Or did you fail successfully? Phantom Liberty provides no comfort, no reassurance that we did the right thing or what's best for V. We have the choices we made and the consequences of those choices, and no choice is immune from those consequences. Furthermore, we have no established metric by which we can gauge our success. We have to come up with that ourselves. And considering the DLC's narrative themes of the impermanence of freedom and the place of the individual in the shadows of a war fought by entities that have transcended humanity, or at the very least decency, are we really going to let anyone but ourselves decide that for us? Without over-detailing, Phantom Liberty's narrative is incredible. We begin it with our instincts and little more. We're thrown on a topsy-turvy roller coaster of espionage, good characters, and lies, and at the end of it all, we only have our gut to justify and make sense of the choices we made along the way. And Johnny's 2 pence, I suppose. Now, a huge element to Phantom Liberty's charm is the fact that it's a spy thriller. The general gameplay loop is obviously unchanged from the base game. There are some added perks, particularly relic points, which tends to upgrade primarily your ARM cyberware, boasting some small transformations to gameplay. But I'd say it's quite underwhelming, particularly by comparison to how much sense relic points don't make. After all the relic is an Arasaka biochip that stores the digitized psyche of Johnny Silverhand, so I have no idea how it's tied to a special skill tree that pertains to cyberware I'd imagine Johnny never had. I get the general idea that So-Mi has hacked the relic and is dumping clusters of corrupted data to make room for these skills, but that's still inflated logic by comparison to the rest of the skill trees, and only serves to ensure a throwaway line of dialogue in our meeting with So-Mi inadvertently makes the pause menu canon, and then we run around Dogtown looking for relic points, hacking specific terminals that only show up here. It's the most blatant gameism, and to be fair, it's a minor flaw, but it's a flaw nonetheless, and I didn't know how else to integrate it, but it isn't what I actually want to talk about. But largely, the DLC's spy thriller focus does not heavily impact gameplay much at all. At least when factoring the moment to moment, it's still the same shooter. Now, unfortunately for RPGs, particularly the DLCs of them, by the time you make it to the back end of the game and are actually playing the expansions, you're likely hyper familiar with the gameplay loop and over-leveled to shit. So, a DLC has to address 2 problems. The gameplay's very novelty wearing off, and the challenge becoming blunted by the fact that the player is now intimately familiar with how the game works. That's not to say it's immediately old and bad because we're too familiar with it, but its presence doesn't automatically equate substance. So that's where Phantom Liberty's intense high-quality narrative does a lot of heavy lifting. But a story in a game isn't just a story being told, it's a story the player is living. Of course that means the storytelling influences the gameplay quite substantially. There are few story games where that isn't the case. What's important for a DLC story though is how it influences gameplay. You can't necessarily magically transform Cyberpunk into the experience it's not, but you can fall back on the oldest trick in the book when it comes to narrative open-world games, and that is set pieces. For all zero of you that asks, what is a set piece? I think it's fair to say it's a vaguely defined buzz term, as the definition can vary depending on the experience it's a part of. The best way to understand what it is to substitute the term set piece with the word that best summarizes the intent of a set piece, and that is spectacle. Cyberpunk in general has plenty of set pieces, where the open world in general takes a back seat for a linear event or series of events, where the intent is very obviously to not just progress the narrative and give us a cool sequence of events, but to provide us with spectacle. With that in mind, anything that withdraws us from the openness of this very open world game could, to some extent, be defined as a set piece, and that's very common in open world games. In fact, it's oftentimes highly unremarkable. Cyberpunk balances these moments with plenty of faff that can occur in the open world, and unfortunately the quality of the open world content at times can be quite unremarkable. So when you are withdrawn from that and locked into a unique experience you can only capture in this one mission, regardless of whether or not you know it, no other part of the game is going to try and replicate it exactly, it obliterates your expectations for what's possible within the game. You can get as familiar with the general gameplay loop as you want, but you can no longer predict the scope of an experience that doesn't treat that as a hard rule. If the game was over-reliant on its set pieces, it might rightly have been criticised for being a tad too linear for an open world experience. But again, Phantom Liberty can tap into the benefit of being attached to the overall experience that is Cyberpunk 2077. As an extension of an open world game that's already been experienced, it can get away with a more intense and frequent packaging of set pieces that reliably give you new, interesting, and more spectacular experiences, pre-balanced against everything else that Cyberpunk has to offer. This allows the DLC to inhabit the position of cinematic action thriller within an open world RPG. As such, there are many moments where your gameplay itinerary transcends the RPG foundations the game is built around, and our moment-to-moment success is not always entirely determined by stats and being at the correct level to do a certain thing. And that grants us some of the game's greatest moments, never mind just the DLC. For instance, the mission to infiltrate the Black Sapphire is incredible. You sneak in through some flooded tunnels, engage in a tiny modicum of standard stealth gameplay, take out some security, and provided you're good enough and it doesn't devolve into a shootout, guide Reed through a lengthy stealth segment from a fixed position. Then you rendezvous, slap on some disguises, and then waltz into the function like you own the place, keeping a low profile as you look for So-Mi, swilling champagne, enjoying the sights, overhearing conversations. The only downside being, despite being able to drink extensive bubbly, there's no option for V to get progressively smashed as the mission drags on. Nevertheless, there's no moment in this mission that is not a visual feast, and once you arrive at the party, shootouts in the slums feels like an entire game away. You're here on spy business, mingling with the wealthy and influential, enjoying extravagant performances and drinking expensive booze. The fact that you're on a secret mission doesn't subtract from how highly immersive that is. And it's so vastly distinct from general gameplay that its novelty not only enriches itself, but also the gameplay it makes a distinction from. And this isn't the only top-tier set piece that Phantom Liberty boasts. The Killing Moon ending, if we side with So-Mi, is set on a rainy night at the spaceport. We get an on-rail stealth segment where we get to see President Maya's true face as she ruthlessly pursues So-Mi. Of course, she doesn't know we're hidden in a vent about 12 feet away from her, and we learn so much from this approximation of invisibility. It also takes so much time to allow us to learn about our chosen ally. You get plentiful shootouts if you're gunfight inclined, and it culminates in a confrontation in the rain between V and Reed that feels earned. But in my opinion, the best removal from the general gameplay loop that the game offers is actually also the worst. Should we betray So-Mi instead, she goes completely off the rails. She loses control. In seconds, she's transformed from a character in need to a creature of horror. She escapes while we face off with Kurt Hansen and is apprehended by Magstag. Of course, we bid to rescue her, and that forces us to face off against a SWAT team of psychopaths. But even then, So-Mi chooses to evade us. Long story short, we track her down to an abandoned Militech facility known as Sinosure Site C, where nothing could truly prepare me for the horror that awaited within. After having jumped down the shaft, there's no chance in hell we'd ever go back up that way. We have no choice but to plunge deeper and deeper into this abandoned facility in the pursuit of So-Mi. But we don't necessarily find her, she finds us, manifesting on multiple screens before us, appearing nothing short of demonic. And after a brief conversation where she cannot be reasoned with, we are forced to venture further into the Sinosure facility, now taking every step with a paranoid caution. And as we pursue her, Somi establishes contact with the relic, disconnecting our contact with Johnny again, disabling the bulk of our cyberware and leaving us to tiptoe around this facility completely alone, creating an atmosphere of isolation deep underground. As we keep pushing through the tension, we learn a lot about Somi's backstory, her culpability in the events that led up to the expansion, and it's just when we think we found Somi that the game devolves into survival horror.
I don't want to hurt you, V. Never did. I'm leaving you here, where you'll be safe.
The next part of the quest has us skulk around the facility visiting terminals so that we can progress, but unfortunately we aren't alone as we do it. We're actively being hunted by an invulnerable murder robot, and this thing is utterly petrifying. We are powerless against it. All we can do is run and hide. Now, I absolutely dreaded and, in a way, hated this segment, but I also really enjoyed and really respected it. This action RPG has taken the player and thrust us into a situation where our stats, the thing we've worked on throughout the entire game, no longer matters. We are alone in a dimly lit underground abandoned research facility being stalked by a mechanical monstrosity controlled by a taunting AI through Songbird. The game has gone from a power fantasy to quite possibly the thing most removed from it: survival horror. It's been described as being a bit like a minuscule slice of alien isolation in Cyberpunk 2077, and that's precisely what this is. And that is, understandably, a massive risk to take. Now, as much as I like ambient horror, I'm not so big on survival horror. I'm no good at most horror games and I absolutely abhor jump scares. So having a game that's vastly different from horror transform into a survival horror experience out of the blue with no indication is going to be incredibly polarizing. People who dislike horror might like Cyberpunk, and in my experience, people who dislike horror really dislike horror. This is because horror games often thrive on stress and anxiety, things the vast majority of games exist to counteract, to give you something else to focus on. So if you're going to place a slice of alien isolation in a non-horror game, it has to be as simple as possible. So in Phantom Liberty, the quest Somewhat Damaged is quite simple. You are simply evading the big robot creature, being notified that it's nearby by black wall glitches in your field of view, and hiding. All the while, the Cerberus bot follows rather predictable patterns as it searches the rooms, and is cursed with quite an awful field of view, so unless you're standing right in front of it, chances are still pretty good it won't see you. All you've got to do is avoid it and make for a terminal in a room, wait for the machine to enter that room and leave, and then you know you've got a few minutes before it comes back to hack the terminal, which does happen in real time to artificially inflate stress, while memorizing a fairly basic map layout. The bulk of what makes this so good is entirely rooted in the atmosphere, and for the most part the pacing is dictated by your fear and hesitation. It may be a different caliber of challenge to what the rest of Cyberpunk makes you feel used to, but it uses its deceptive intensity to seem harder and longer than this segment actually is. So even this is more about the exhibition, the spectacle, than any kind of challenge. And that makes its addition in a game that generally is vastly different to this hour or so that it took me a welcome change of pace, despite having gameplay akin to a genre I don't much enjoy. And so my initial loathing and dread for something that I had no reason to anticipate quickly disappeared into an appreciation for how captivating it overall was, constantly being fed information about Somi and Reed's backstory, the self-evident lore implications of how dangerous the rogue AIs from beyond the Black Wall are, and the general terror I felt tiptoeing around this machine while it rather incompetently hunted me, although in no way that made it seem particularly comedic. In fact, in my opinion, this is akin to how Cyberpunk should have handled Adam Smasher's confrontation. Don't get me wrong, seeing Adam Smasher charge at you, especially when deploying his Sandevistan, can get your blood pumping, but it doesn't hold a candle to evading something you are powerless against which would have been quite fitting for this universe's bogeyman, or at least a lot more fitting than beating the guy to death with a dildo. It isn't too tricky nor traumatizing to get through, but the exhibition is scary, and as a result, this metal abomination was memorable, and our face-off with RoboCop and the Killdozer's hate child wasn't. The challenge isn't the issue, the premise of the fight undermines the occasion. Just like being able to head-on defeat the Cerberus unit would completely undermine the atmosphere of this segment. In a way, I see this hide-and-seek game with the over-engineered Cerberus unit, particularly given that it's the culmination of the DLC provided you side with Reed, as something of an acknowledgement from CD Projekt that the final confrontation in the main game is slightly underwhelming, and there are better ways to get your point across than a straight-up fight. At least sometimes. There are certain messages a fight can never get across. There are certain characters a head-on battle with will never do justice. For instance, the almost eldritch AI from Beyond the Black Wall. You can't make them scary if they're easy to overcome. As for Smasher with the word bogeyman thrown around so reliably, a fight, particularly one that we're supposed to win, especially while V is so close to death with the relic that we can barely stand, was ever going to do justice to that aspect of Smasher's character. But down here in the Cynosure facility, being hunted by this horror, the implications of what else is out there is well communicated. After all, it's being scary for the sake of what it's trying to imply too. Does this mean I think the next Cyberpunk game should have more survival horror segments? No, I think it was basically a one-trick wonder. But that one time, it was a hell of a trick. It accomplished being memorable so well I vaguely remember dreaming about it, and it made everything that followed getting past the bloody thing feel earned. And that's ultimately what you'll want most from your last huzzah before the wind down. But before we move off it, whomever at CD Projekt Red's brainchild this nightmare was, you're an evil genius. Now behave yourself. To conclude the broader point I'm trying to make, Phantom Liberty's set pieces are great, but they aren't necessarily immune from missed opportunities themselves. If you recall, during the party at the Black Sapphire, after you've no doubt tried and failed to get V totally bladdered, we more or less conclude our evening by gambling and engaging with a couple of ginger French siblings, and the idea is to keep them both talking so we can download their behavioural imprints. Then later on we visit a Ripper doc that Reed directs us to, who gives us a strange face implant. And then we abduct the siblings, Alex and Reed slaughter them, we steal their clothes and disguise ourselves with their faces. Not only that, we assume their voices and the surface level of their personalities. Some proper ridiculous over-engineered futuristic spy bollocks, perfect for Cyberpunk's take on a frankly absurd genre. We don't do this entirely for vibes, we do it to infiltrate Barguest right under Kurt Hansen's nose, assassinate Hansen and rescue So-Mi. And here comes the integral part of the set piece. We have to sell our cover. To do this, we're fed some basic, easily memorized information that, in our walk up to the meeting with Hansen, we have to memorize. And then once in dialogue with him, we must answer his questions accordingly in order to not raise suspicion. And I think that's a really cool, just nonsensical enough way to integrate the slightly daft core of a spy thriller into Cyberpunk. Now you're probably wondering what is the missed opportunity with this face implant. Well, you see, despite momentarily getting our face removed to fit the thing, we only get to use the thing about twice. Once in the story, and look, I get it, it would get old if it was any more. And then once under the instruction of the fixer Mr. Hands, who has come a long way since his run-in with the horse, where we assume the exterior of a Cuban mercenary named Aguilar. Also, Mr. Hands can influence the power balance in Dogtown following the death of Kurt Hansen, but beyond those two instances, the bastard thing is mostly functionally redundant, though it must be said you can utilize it to shake a wanted level. Now maybe I'm wrong here, but I can't help but think this is the missed opportunity for a very handy stealth tool. You know, channel a bit of Hitman and give us a rudimentary disguise system. In fairness, Phantom Liberty does take the time to go over how elaborate this disguise is, which to me is just an opportunity for it to, in faster paced, more gameplay oriented situations, be more fallible. I can respect why it isn't this way, but at the same time I can't help but feel as if Phantom Liberty missed a trick. Beyond that suggestion for how a novelty feature could have petaled out into gameplay more, I think it's fair to say that this DLC has most of the best set pieces Cyberpunk 2077 has to offer, and it does a lot of heavy lifting just as much as part of the storyline as its own thing. Now, there's another area that feels mightily improved within Phantom Liberty versus the rest of Cyberpunk, and that is the side content. I alluded to this when discussing the world at the start of the video, that Cyberpunk 2077 side content can at times slip into a built-in bulk feel, and that to an extent is unavoidable. It's a big open world that has to have enough content to justify it. While plenty of that content is of an inarguably high standard, Cyberpunk 2077 is not above the occasional, no, rather frequent actually, inflation of the content with rather disinteresting activities. For instance, across Night City, for fixers we can do jobs. They seem to always know where V is in the world and will call us if we're nearby to a job they want us to do. Problem is, there's so many fixers, none of them get any meaningful introductions, and there's so many jobs that they're practically blowing up our phones 24/7, ensuring we don't get any solace as we trawl through Night City. How all of these fixers know where we are at all times never really crops up. That doesn't sound like a particularly good idea for V's privacy, and while these minor jobs aren't always boring as a rule, they can be. It's a very inconsistent facet of content. It's very obviously designed to be high volume, and that pokes through with the general low quality of many of these jobs. Top to bottom, you get the sense less thought went into any particular job than it takes time for the player to actually complete it. Oftentimes they exist as a reliable method to money farm. You get paid for actually doing the jobs, you can pick up tons of weapons off your dead enemies and sell them, or indeed dismantle them for crafting components. So, doing them within the space of about 2 hours, you go from Night City's brokest merc to the in-game economy shitting itself. The point is, much of this content, were it not for the rewards, wouldn't be worth the time it takes to do them. The jobs exist so you can over-level in a game in which that's not difficult even without them, and make tons of money and farm resources for cyberware, all while your brain is entirely disengaged. So, I was very pleased that that did not translate into Phantom Liberty. The jobs do exist in Dogtown, but their entry point is less convoluted. There's only one fixer, Mr. Hands, and the jobs he sends us on more reliably tell stories. They take longer to complete, meaning they're more detailed, and as a result feel less like throwaway content for the sake of it. And since the gigs largely revolve around the struggles of Dogtown, they feel more focused when observed as a whole. They function more as side quests than gigs as seen in the base game, and I suppose that lack of a distinction is a bit weird. But in the base game, the distinction between side quests and gigs was that one category was reliably worth your time, and the other category often wasn't. I think Phantom Liberty's distinction is a bit more sensible. Side quests are things that V can get involved with for many reasons, but these general gigs, the reason why V gets involved with those is to get paid. Removing V's emotional investment from the offset is no excuse to not bother to tell a story. That story does not have to be remarkable. Phantom Liberty's gigs often aren't, but there is a story to follow. And while they are on average quite a bit longer than the base game's gigs, they don't make a habit of outstaying their welcome either. And while the rewards for doing these aren't necessarily lesser or greater than the base game ones, because they average at significantly more than 90 seconds a pop, 2 hours of continuously doing them won't transform you into Night City's very own Elon Musk. So the rewards for the gigs feel more balanced, and the gigs themselves are superior to what felt like a lucky dip between half-decent side quests and generic open world events. As for actual defined by the game side quests, there are plenty of those as well, and they are of the caliber that you would come to expect from Cyberpunk. With a narrative so gripping that rolls into itself so fluidly, it can be difficult to take time away from the storyline to actually go off and enjoy what Dogtown has to offer in this department, but it is worth it. The gigs are easier to off the bat justify because you know they won't eat up too much time, even if they are longer than in the base game. But if Cyberpunk's main story is a race against time, then Phantom Liberty is a race against time double locked, so I didn't often find myself going off looking for more to do. Nevertheless, there are some memorable experiences awaiting in Dogtown. For instance, necking a couple swigs with a couple Barghest troops, while one of them recounts a story about him and Kurt Hansen. We can take a drug that transports us into the events where we assume playing as Kurt Hansen, partaking in the unreliable narrator's story. It's a bit strange that he would appear to fantasize about getting the daylights beat out of him by Kurt Hansen, but it amounts to a rhythm of storytelling that we can't get in the rest of the game. It's a unique occurrence, and to keep a long game like Cyberpunk as interesting as possible, it needs as many of those as you can cram into it. Furthermore, this sort of thing demonstrates precisely what side content should be all about. It's not just more of the game, or indeed a way to level up further to mitigate challenge in upcoming story quests. Side content should be striving to tell its own stories. They're more self-contained than any one story quest, they're usually a lot easier to follow. But the main thing is it provides flavour for the world. That might enrich the main storyline, but that's not the principal point. The main point is it makes the world feel like it actually exists, that it's alive and things happen within it, regardless of whether or not the player is actually involved. Even Dogtown, though it thrives as a backdrop, needs that. The guaranteed way to sell us this is to give us optional content that proves memorable. And the misremembering of an exploit of Kurt Hansen is definitely hard to forget. Yes, it's ever so slightly absurd, and events may have transpired entirely differently to how this fella is choosing to remember them, but Hansen isn't our takeaway from it. Paco and Babs are. And that's just one example among plenty of how Dogtown through side quests makes itself memorable. And it does that on top of elevating its more simplistic gigs, ensuring everything we do is worthy of the time it takes to do it. And that at times was something the base game struggled with. But in a DLC that doesn't have to be anywhere remotely close to that size. I understand it's somewhat easier to understand where the limit is, where the parameters are. With the rest of Night City, no doubt CD Projekt loaded it up with content until they ran out of time. But a DLC not even remotely needing to replicate that size means more emphasis goes towards quality than quantity in this department. And if nothing else, Phantom Liberty very clearly strives to be of the highest quality it can possibly achieve. And that brings me to this video's conclusion. Phantom Liberty is a narrative masterpiece. The characters are deep and complex, they all have a horse in the race, and we're thrust into a spy thriller to decipher this mess. The story is great because it takes the time to make you feel ambivalent towards all of them. There are moments where they seem great, moments where they seem awful, moments in between, and it comes together to give us something we can't entirely gauge. The game humanizes its characters by demonstrating them to be flawed, sometimes misguided or indeed guided by personal interest, and that makes our job of figuring out who to side with harder, so when we inevitably come to make that decision, we question and reflect upon the journey we've been on, and that's a big win for any RPG. Beyond the story itself though, Phantom Liberty is an expansion that isn't afraid to deviate from the game's general confines, giving us new engaging gameplay, disguising ourselves as French people, or indeed being chased around an underground abandoned facility by a terrifying monstrous murder bot we are powerless against. Phantom Liberty uses the fact that it's a DLC and not a standalone game to experiment and overindulge in a way the base game cannot. It fleshes out its immersive backdrop of Dogtown with high quality content. It simplifies what needed simplifying and injects stories and character wherever similar content in the base game lacked it. Then, to top it off, Phantom Liberty's score is utterly sublime. This game's music is just right for the espionage rollercoaster of distrust and half-truths we're on. Simply put, Phantom Liberty took what Cyberpunk 2077 thrived on to begin with. Its characters, its atmosphere, its general gameplay, I suppose, can be added in, and its willingness to throw us into unique set pieces for the sake of spectacle, and elevates it to the next level. If the next Cyberpunk entry can accomplish at least this, and maybe launch at a fit date, but that feels like a bit like asking Santa Claus for a Lamborghini at this point, then we'll be eating good. And with that, I bring today's video to its conclusion. I'd like to apologise for how long it's taken me to actually get something else out there. I feel I should probably do that. I did get a new PC recently, and some software that I used in my previous workflow just doesn't exist anymore, and I finally decided to break free from Vegas Pro, so I've started using DaVinci Resolve, so I had to learn a software I'm not familiar with to at least a semi-competent level before I could actually post anything again. And while I'm nowhere near at the level with DaVinci Resolve that I hope to be in the future, I'm very optimistic about it because it helped me make this video and I don't know much about it still, so I suppose you can judge for yourselves. There will likely be some errors in the production of it that I'll iron out as we go along, but for the most part I'm very impressed with DaVinci Resolve and wish I made the jump years ago. But I suppose the most important thing is I have now made that jump. I really enjoy using this software, it's quite intuitive, and more importantly, it doesn't crash every 10 minutes. Not to mention it's a lot harder to see where the actual ceiling as to what's possible within it is, but no doubt having to learn that has inflated the production time for this video, so what can you do? It's a necessary evil, but I'm not dead, I promise, at least as far as I'm aware. I also have a Discord server you can join now. I don't want to put any links in the description, that just controls ingress a bit. So instead I have a QR code for you that's on screen now. Since you made it to the end of the video and now you're officially listening to me ramble, you've passed the test. Come and join us. We don't bite. The server's still in its early stages and we're still in the middle of figuring out how everything works. God knows why Discord chose to be this confusing. So it'll only improve over time, and I'll only ever advertise it as a QR code at the end of long videos like this. But you know what, you've officially listened to my rambling enough, so thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It would all be massively appreciated. And with any luck, I'll see you all very soon with another video at some point. Until then, take care, and goodbye.